I never thought I'd hear those words come out of her mouth. Not after everything we'd been through. Not after 17 years of marriage, 2 kids, and a mortgage we'd scraped together with nothing but hope and overtime shifts. But there I was, standing in the driveway of a $7 million estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, watching my ex-wife Eleanor smile at me from the marble steps like I was some kind of stranger who'd stumbled onto the wrong property. "The children finally have a real father," she said. Just like that. No hesitation. No softness in her voice. She stood there in a designer dress. I couldn't even pronounce the name of, one hand resting on the shoulder of her new husband. Richard Pemberton, tech mogul, venture capitalist, the kind of man whose watch cost more than my annual salary. And behind them, through those massive French doors, I could see my kids. My son Tyler, 14, and my daughter Hannah, 11. They were laughing at something Richard had said, and they didn't even look my way. If you've ever felt your entire identity crumble in a single moment, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Comment below and tell me where you're watching this from, because I need to know I'm not alone in this. And if you've been through something similar, stick around, because what happened next changed everything. Make sure to check the description box for more stories like this one. You're going to want to hear how this ends. I'm David Sullivan, 42 years old, project manager at a mid-sized construction firm in Hartford. Or at least, that's who I was when this story began. Average guy, average salary, average life. I'd worked my whole adult life building other people's dreams. Office complexes, shopping centers, luxury condos I'd never be able to afford. I took pride in the work, even when my body ached from long days on site. Even when Eleanor complained that I smelled like sawdust and concrete when I came home. Eleanor and I met in college. University of Connecticut, sophomore year. She was studying business administration, and I was in the engineering program. We fell in love in the library, of all places, bonding over terrible cafeteria coffee, and shared dreams of a simple, happy life. She wasn't materialistic back then. She used to tell me that money didn't matter as long as we had each other. She wore thrift store sweaters and made jokes about trust fund kids. We got married at 25 in a small ceremony at her parents' house. Nothing fancy, just family and close friends, and a cake her aunt made that was lopsided but delicious. Those early years were hard but good. We lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in West Hartford, saving every penny for a down payment on a house. When Tyler was born, we were still sleeping on a hand-me-down mattress from my cousin. When Hannah came along 3 years later, we'd finally scraped together enough for a modest 3-bedroom ranch in a decent school district. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Every mortgage payment felt like a victory. But something changed in Eleanor over the years. Maybe it started when her college friends began posting vacation photos from Tuscany and the Maldives while we were camping in state parks. Maybe it was when her sister married a surgeon and moved into a house with a pool and a 3-car garage. Or maybe it was just that I never made enough, never climbed high enough, never became a man she thought she'd married. The arguments started small. Why couldn't I take on more projects? Why wasn't I pushing for promotions? Why did we always have the budget for everything? Then they got bigger. She started going out more with her networking group, a collection of women married to doctors, lawyers, executives. She'd come home smelling like expensive wine and looking at our house like it was a prison. She stopped asking about my day, stopped touching me, stopped seeing me. I should have seen the affair coming. But I was too busy trying to hold everything together, working extra hours, picking up the slack when she was too tired to help with homework or make dinner. I thought if I just worked harder, proved myself more, she'd remember why she fell in love with me in the first place. Then came the night I found the text messages. Richard Pemberton. They'd met at some charity gala her networking group had attended. He was recently divorced, looking for someone authentic and real. His words, not mine. The messages were explicit, not just sexual, but filled with promises of a different life, a better life, trips to Paris, shopping sprees, a house where she'd never have to worry about money again. I confronted her. She didn't even try to deny it. She just looked at me with this cold, calculated expression and said, "David, I need more than this, more than you. The divorce was brutal. She wanted the house, full custody, and enough alimony to maintain the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to. I fought for joint custody and won, barely. She got the house. I got an apartment that smelled like mildew and an every other weekend visitation schedule that made me feel like a guest in my own children's lives. 6 months later, she married Richard. The wedding was in Martha's Vineyard. I saw the photos on social media. Hundreds of guests, a live band, a dress that probably cost more than my car. Tyler and Hannah were in the wedding party. They looked happy. That's what killed me. They looked so damn happy. Standing in that driveway in Greenwich, hearing those words, the children finally have a real father, something inside me shattered completely. I didn't say anything. Couldn't. I just turned around, got in my 10-year-old Honda Civic, and drove. I drove for hours, no destination in mind, tears blurring the road ahead. I ended up pulling over a rest stop somewhere on I-84, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white, and I screamed. Just screamed until my throat was raw. What was I supposed to do now? I'd lost everything. My wife, my kids, my home, my identity as a father, a husband, a provider. I was 42 years old with nothing to show for my life except a string of failed attempts to be good enough. And now, apparently, I wasn't even a real father. That's when I decided to go back. Back to where it all started. Back to Litchfield County. To the house where I grew up. My mother had passed away 3 years earlier from cancer, and my father had followed her 6 months later. Heart attack, though I think it was really a broken heart. The house had been sitting empty ever since. I'd been avoiding it, avoiding the memories, avoiding the grief. But now I had nowhere else to go, no one else to be. I needed to clear it out, sell it, maybe use whatever money I got to start over somewhere new, somewhere Eleanor and Richard and their perfect life couldn't follow me. So I drove north, away from Greenwich and Marble Estates, back to the small, weathered farmhouse on 40 acres of land that had been in my family for 3 generations. I arrived just after sunset. The house looked exactly as I remembered. White clapboard siding, green shutters, a wraparound porch that sagged in places. The fields around it had gone wild, tall grass swaying in the autumn wind. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the front door, remembering what it felt like to be a kid here, running through those fields, helping my grandfather fix the fence, learning to drive on the dirt road that wound through the property. My grandfather, Thomas Sullivan, he'd been the backbone of this family, owned a small manufacturing company. Sullivan Industrial made metal components for construction projects. Nothing glamorous, but steady work. He died when I was 16, sudden and unexpected. Stroke. I remember my father crying at the funeral, something I'd never seen before or since. After that, everything changed. My father became distant, almost angry. The company was sold off within a year. We never talked about it. Never talked about my grandfather again. Really, it was like his memory had been locked away along with everything else. I finally got out of the car and walked up to the house. The key was where it had always been, under the third stone from the left on the porch steps. Inside, everything was covered in dust sheets, the air thick with abandonment. I wandered through the rooms, each one triggering a flood of memories. The kitchen where my mother made Sunday dinners. The living room where my father would fall asleep watching football. My old bedroom upstairs, still decorated with posters of bands I'd loved as a teenager. And then I remembered the attic. I hadn't been up there since I was a kid. My grandfather used to keep things up there, old files, equipment, tools. My father had forbidden me from going up after Grandpa died, and eventually I'd just forgotten about it. But now, with nothing left to lose and nowhere else to look for answers about who I was supposed to be, I pulled down the attic ladder and climbed up into the darkness. And that's where everything changed. The attic smelled like old wood and decades of accumulated memories. Dust motes swirled in the beam of my flashlight as I swept it across the space. Boxes everywhere. Old furniture draped in sheets. A rocking horse I vaguely remembered riding as a small child. For a moment, I almost climbed back down. What was I expecting to find up here? Some magical answer to fix my broken life? But something made me stay. Maybe it was the desperate need to feel connected to something, anything, from a time when I felt like I mattered. Maybe it was just the silence. No ex-wife's voice telling me I was enough. No empty apartment waiting for me. No pity from friends who'd slowly stopped calling. I started going through boxes randomly. Old tax returns from the 80s. My grandmother's china, carefully wrapped in newspaper. Photo albums filled with black and white images of relatives I never knew. And then, in the far corner, beneath a tarp covered in cobwebs, I found something that didn't belong. A metal case, military grade from the look of it, heavy, about 2 feet long and a foot wide. And there, carved into the metal plate on the top, roughly done but unmistakable, David Sullivan. My name, my exact name. Not my father's. He was Robert. This was meant for me. My hands trembled as I pulled it out from under the tarp. There was a combination lock on the front for digits. I had no idea what the combination could be, but something made me try my birthday. 0817, August 17th. The lock clicked open. If you're still watching, I need you to understand. What I found in that case changed everything I thought I knew about my life. If this story is hitting you in any way, do me a favor and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Check the description for more stories like this, because what came next, nobody could have seen coming. Inside the case were documents, lots of them, legal papers, bound together with rubber bands that had deteriorated with age. I pulled out the first stack, and my flashlight beam caught on the letterhead. Last will and testament of Thomas Edward Sullivan. My grandfather's will. Why was this hidden in the attic? My father had handled all of that after Grandpa died. There had been no mention of a will, or if there was, I'd been too young to be involved in those conversations. I assumed everything had been settled, sold off, distributed. Case closed. I started reading, and with each paragraph, my reality fractured a little more. The will was dated 6 months before my grandfather's death. It was detailed, specific, and notarized. And there, on page 3, section 7, subsection B, I found my name. To my grandson, David Robert Sullivan, I bequeath my entire share of Sullivan Industrial Holdings, including all assets, properties, and accounts associated with the company, to be held in trust until his 25th birthday, at which time full ownership shall transfer to him unconditionally. I read it again, and again. The words didn't change. Sullivan Industrial Holdings, not the small manufacturing company I remembered. Holdings, plural. I flipped through more documents. Corporate filings, stock certificates, property deeds, financial statements dated just before my grandfather's death. And there it was, in black and white. Total estimated value of estate, $127 million. $127 million. In 1999, 26 years ago, I couldn't breathe. The attic suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. I set the papers down and put my head between my knees, trying to stop the room from spinning. This had to be a mistake. Some old document that had been superseded by other arrangements. But then why was it hidden? Why was my name carved into the case? I forced myself to keep reading. There were letters in the case, too, handwritten on my grandfather's personal stationery. The first one was addressed to my father. Robert, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I need you to understand something. The company isn't what you think it is. Over the past 20 years, I've expanded beyond manufacturing. Real estate, technology patents, investment portfolios. I did it quietly, carefully, because I didn't want the attention. Didn't want to change who we were as a family. But I also wanted to secure David's future. He's special, Robert. That boy has something you and I don't. Kindness, imagination, genuine goodness. This world will try to crush that out of him. This inheritance is meant to protect him, to give him the freedom to become whoever he's meant to be. Don't let your pride or your fears get in the way. This is for David. It's always been for David. My father, he'd known everything. There were more letters. One to a lawyer named Bernard Whitfield at a firm in Boston. One to my grandmother, explaining the same thing, and then, at the bottom of the case, I found a letter addressed to me. Dear David, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and someone has finally given you what's rightfully yours. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you in person. I wanted to, so many times, but I also knew you needed to grow up without this hanging over you. Money changes people, David. I've seen it destroy families, corrupt good men, turn children into entitled monsters. I wanted you to become yourself first, to learn the value of hard work, of struggle, of earning your place in this world. And then, when you were ready, this would be here, not as a crutch, but as a tool. Use it wisely. Use it kindly. Don't let it define you. You're so much more than money could ever make you. I love you, my boy. I always will. Grandpa, I was crying, full, body-shaking sobs. All those years, all that struggling, the fights with Eleanor about money, the shame of not being able to give my kids the things their friends had, the crushing weight of never feeling like I was enough. And this had been here all along, hidden in an attic 40 miles from where I'd been drowning. But why? Why would my father hide this from me? I dug deeper into the case. More documents. Letters between my father and Bernard Whitfield, the lawyer. And that's when I found it. The answer I didn't want to find. My father had contested the will. Immediately after my grandfather's death, he'd filed legal papers claiming that Thomas Sullivan had been mentally incompetent when he'd written it, that he'd been manipulated, that the entire thing was invalid. The case had dragged on for 2 years, and eventually there had been a settlement. The company had been sold. My father had forced a sale, and the proceeds had been divided. My father took the majority share, claiming it was his right as the only child. A portion was placed in trust for me, but far less than the will had specified, and the entire matter had been sealed with a non-disclosure agreement. My father had stolen my inheritance. He'd looked at that will, at his father's explicit wishes, and decided he deserved it more. He'd spent 2 years fighting lawyers, burning through money on legal fees, and ultimately forcing a sale that destroyed my grandfather's legacy. And then he'd hidden all the evidence in an attic and never said a word. The documents showed that the trust he'd set up for me, the one I'd never known existed, had grown over the years. With interest and investments managed by Bernard Whitfield's firm, it was now worth approximately $47 million. But according to my grandfather's original will, with the company's growth and proper management over 26 years, my inheritance should have been worth over $200 million. My father had stolen $150 million from me, from his own son, and he'd taken the secret to his grave. I sat there in the attic until dawn, reading every document, every letter, every piece of evidence. I learned that Sullivan Industrial had been acquired by a larger corporation and eventually absorbed into a tech conglomerate that was now worth billions. I learned that my grandfather had owned prime real estate in Boston and Hartford that had been sold off for pennies on the dollar in the forced liquidation. I learned that Bernard Whitfield had tried to fight for me, had sent letters to my father begging him to reconsider, and had finally given up and managed what little remained according to the settlement terms. And I learned that I was supposed to gain access to the trust on my 25th birthday. I was now 42. For 17 years, I'd been entitled to $47 million, and I'd never known. I'd watched my marriage crumble under the weight of financial stress. I'd felt worthless and inadequate. I'd lost my children to a man who could give them what I thought I never could, all while sitting on a fortune I didn't know existed. The rage came slowly, then all at once. It started in my chest, a burning sensation that spread to my entire body. I wanted to scream, to break something, to dig up my father's grave and demand answers. How could he do this to me? How could he look me in the eye every day of my life, watch me struggle and say nothing? But then another thought crept in, colder and sharpened the rage. Eleanor, Richard, that $7 million estate, those words, the children finally have a real father. They had no idea who I really was, what I was worth, what I'd always been worth, and I was going to make sure they found out. I didn't leave the attic until the sun was fully up. My phone had died hours earlier, and I'd missed a dozen calls and texts, probably from work, wondering why I hadn't shown up. I didn't care. Nothing about my old life mattered anymore. That version of David Sullivan was dead. The man who climbed down from that attic was someone new, someone who'd been buried under years of lies and stolen birthright. The first thing I did was drive to Boston. Bernard Whitfield's firm, according to the documents, was still operational. Whitfield, Chun and Associates, a small estate planning practice in Back Bay. I showed up unannounced at 9 in the morning, still wearing the same clothes from the day before, probably looking half insane with red eyes and dust in my hair. The receptionist tried to tell me I needed an appointment. I set the metal case on her desk with a heavy thunk and said 3 words: Thomas Sullivan's will. Bernard Whitfield was in his late 70s now, mostly retired, but he came out of his office within 5 minutes. He took one look at me at the case, and I watched something like relief and sadness cross his face. "David," he said quietly, "I wondered if this day would ever come." We spent 6 hours in his office. He explained everything: the legal battle, my father's arguments, the settlement, the trust he'd been managing for decades. He'd sent letters to my last known address every year, but they'd been returned. My father had moved us 3 times during my 20s, never leaving forwarding addresses with Bernard's firm. Whether that was intentional or not, I'll never know. But the effect was the same. I'd never been informed that I was sitting on a fortune. Bernard had invested conservatively, but wisely. The $47 million was real, liquid, and entirely mine. More than that, he kept detailed records of everything my grandfather had originally intended, every property that had been sold, every patent that had been lost in the liquidation. He'd held on to this information for over 2 decades, hoping someday I'd walk through his door. "Your grandfather was a good man," Bernard said, his eyes watering slightly. "He talked about you constantly, showed me pictures, told me stories about teaching you to fish, to work with your hands. He wanted so badly for you to have a choice in life. Your father—" I think Robert was scared. Scared that the money would change you. Scared that you become someone he couldn't relate to. Or maybe he was just bitter that his father had chosen you over him. I don't know. I tried to understand, but in the end, I couldn't forgive what he did. Neither could I. Bernard helped me access the trust account. Within 48 hours, I had full control of $47 million. We also discussed legal action, whether I could sue my father's estate for the remainder of what should have been mine. Bernard was honest. It would be difficult. The settlement had been legal, if morally bankrupt. The statute of limitations on most of the claims had long passed. I might recover some additional funds, but it would take years and cost millions in legal fees. I decided to let it go, not because I'd forgiven my father, I hadn't and maybe never would, but because I didn't need his money anymore. I had enough, more than enough, and what I wanted now wasn't more wealth. It was something much simpler. I wanted my life back. I wanted my children to see me for who I really was. And I wanted Eleanor and Richard to understand exactly what they'd thrown away. But I had to be smart about it. Strategic. If I just showed up tomorrow driving a Ferrari and wearing a Rolex, I'd look like a fool, like some pathetic man trying to prove something. No, this required patience. Planning. I needed to rebuild myself from the inside out, and I needed to do it in a way that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. If you've ever been handed a second chance at life, you know it's terrifying. You could do anything, be anyone, but you're also painfully aware that you could screw it all up. Stay with me here, because what I did next wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about justice, about truth. And if you're getting something from this story, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment telling me what you do in my position. And check the description box for more stories like these, because trust me, there's more coming. I started by taking a month off work. I told them it was a family emergency, which wasn't really a lie. I used that time to get my head straight, to plan, and to begin quietly transforming my life. First, I hired a personal stylist and a fitness trainer, not because I wanted to look rich, but because I wanted to look like someone who respected himself. Someone who'd stopped merely surviving and started living. I lost 15 pounds. Bought clothes that actually fit. Got a haircut from somewhere other than the supercuts at the strip mall. Second, I bought a house. Not in Greenwich. That would have been too obvious, but in a neighboring town, Madison, a restored colonial with 5 acres, a pool, and enough space for my kids to have their own rooms whenever they visited. It cost $3.2 million, and I paid cash. No mortgage. No debt. Just mine. Third, I reached out to a lawyer specializing in family law. I wanted to revisit my custody arrangement, not to take the kids away from Eleanor. Despite everything, I still believe they needed their mother, but to establish proper 50-50 custody. No more every other weekend scraps. Real equal time. My lawyer took one look at my new financial situation and smiled. This changes things significantly, she said. Fourth, and most importantly, I started volunteering at my kids' schools. Tyler's high school, Hannah's middle school. I didn't announce my return or make a scene. I just quietly signed up to help with the robotics club, to chaperone field trips, to be present in their lives in ways I'd missed over the past year. At first, they seemed confused to see me, then curious, then slowly happy. Tyler asked me one afternoon why I looked different. Not just my appearance, but my whole demeanor. I told him the truth, or part of it. I told him I'd been stuck for a long time, trapped in a version of myself that I didn't like, and I'd finally decided to change. That seemed to satisfy him. Hannah was more direct. Did you win the lottery or something, Dad? I laughed. Something like that. Honey! Something like that. I didn't tell them about the money yet. They weren't ready, and honestly, neither was I. I needed to prove to them first that I was still the same father who taught them to ride bikes and made terrible pancakes on Sunday mornings. The money was just a tool. It didn't change who I was at my core. But Eleanor noticed. Of course she did. It started with small comments during pickups and drop-offs. New car? When I arrived in a Mercedes SUV, practical, not flashy, but undeniably nice. You look good, David, delivered with a suspicious edge. And then, finally, 3 months into my transformation, where are you getting this money? I smiled at her, said nothing, just smiled and drove away with the kids. Richard noticed too. I could see him watching me from the windows of their estate when I'd come to get Tyler and Hannah. Once, he actually came out to introduce himself, extending his hand like we were colleagues at a networking event. Richard Pemberton, he said. I don't think we properly met. I shook his hand, looked him in the eye. David Sullivan, the children's father. I put just enough emphasis on the word father to make my point. He caught it, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Uncertainty, maybe even respect. My lawyer filed the custody modification petition 4 months after I'd found the will. Eleanor fought it initially, arguing that the existing arrangement was in the children's best interest. But when the judge saw my financial statements, my new home, and the detailed parenting plan I prepared, there wasn't much of a case against me. Tyler and Hannah were also old enough to express their preferences. They wanted more time with me. They said so in private sessions with a court-appointed evaluator. The new custody order was granted in December, just before Christmas. 50-50 split, alternating weeks. Holidays divided equally. I'd won, but that wasn't enough. I still had one more move to make, one final truth that Eleanor and Richard needed to hear. And I wanted it to come at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right way. That moment came in early January. Eleanor called me, her voice strained. David, we need to talk. In person. Can you come by tomorrow afternoon? The kids will be at their activities. I knew what this was about. She'd been doing research. Probably hired a private investigator to figure out where my money was coming from. She wanted answers, and she wanted them on her turf, in her palace, where she still felt she had the upper hand. I agreed. Tomorrow afternoon. 2 o'clock. I dressed simply, but well. No designer labels, nothing ostentatious. Just a man comfortable in his own skin. I drove to Greenwich, parked in that same driveway where she destroyed me 6 months earlier, and walked up to the door. Eleanor answered. She dressed for this meeting too, business casual, like she was negotiating a deal. Richard was there, standing in the foyer with his arms crossed. They'd planned this together, a united front. Come in, Eleanor said, "We need to talk about the children and about your sudden financial situation." I followed them into the living room, sat down on a couch that probably cost more than my first car, and I waited. "David," Richard began, "we're concerned. Tyler and Hannah have mentioned that you bought a house, that you're spending money on them in ways that seem inconsistent with your previous circumstances. Eleanor and I need to know, where is this money coming from? Is it legal? Are you involved in something that could put our children at risk?" "Our children." He'd said our children. Eleanor leaned forward. "David, please, just tell us the truth. If you've gotten yourself into trouble, we can help. Richard has connections. We just need to know." I looked at both of them, really looked at them. Eleanor, who'd once loved me for exactly who I was. Richard, who'd never seen me as anything but an obstacle to his perfect new family. And I realized something. I didn't hate them. I didn't even really want revenge anymore. I just wanted them to understand, to know, to carry the weight of what they'd done. So I told them everything. I started with my grandfather, told them about Thomas Sullivan, about the will I'd found in the attic, about the $200 million inheritance that had been stolen from me. I told them about my father's betrayal, about Bernard Whitfield, about the trust I'd never known existed. I laid it all out, calmly and clearly, watching their faces change with every sentence. Eleanor's hand went to her mouth. Richard's arms dropped to his sides. They exchanged a glance, and I saw it, the dawning realization of what this meant, what they'd given up, what they'd said to me. "That's impossible," Eleanor finally whispered. "Your family was... You never said..." "I didn't know," I replied. "Not until 6 months ago. Not until the day I came here, and you told me the children finally had a real father. That's when I went back to my childhood home to clear it out. That's when I found the truth." Richard cleared his throat. "David, we didn't know. If we'd had any idea, would it have mattered?" I asked, and my voice was steady. No anger, just curiosity. "Would you have stayed with me, Eleanor, if you'd known I was worth $47 million? Would you have called me a real father then?" She couldn't answer. Tears were streaming down her face, and for the first time since our divorce, I actually felt sorry for her, because I could see it in her eyes. The calculation, the regret, the desperate mental math of everything she'd thrown away. "I'm not here to gloat," I said, "and I'm not here to take the kids away from you. They love you, Eleanor. Both of you." I nodded at Richard. "And despite everything, I don't want to destroy that. But I need you to understand something. I am their real father. I always have been. Money doesn't change that. A big house doesn't change that. The fact that I work construction and drove an old car and struggled to pay the bills, none of that made me less of a father." "I know," Eleanor sobbed. "God, David, I know. I was wrong. I was so wrong." Richard sat down heavily in an armchair. "What do you want from us?" "Nothing," I said, and I meant it. I already have what I want. I have my kids back, equal custody, a life where I can be present for them, provide for them, show them what real fatherhood looks like. That's all I ever wanted. "But you must want something," Richard pressed. "Some kind of, I don't know, acknowledgement? Apology?" I considered this. An apology would be nice, but it wouldn't change anything. You can't unsay what you said, Eleanor, and you can't unmarry him and come back to me. That's not how life works. We all made choices. We all have to live with them. Eleanor stood up, wiping her eyes. "David, I'm sorry. Truly, I was cruel. I was shallow. I chased money and status, and I threw away something real and good. You deserve better. You always deserve better." It was probably the most honest thing she'd said to me in years, and it didn't make me feel better. It didn't erase the pain or the humiliation or the lonely nights in that terrible apartment, but it was something. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I appreciate you saying that." Richard stood too, extended his hand again, but this time it felt different, respectful. "For what it's worth, you're a good father, David. I've seen you with Tyler and Hannah. They light up when you're around. That's something money can't buy." I shook his hand. "Take care of them when they're with you. That's all I ask. I left Greenwich that afternoon feeling lighter than I had in years. The revenge I thought I wanted, the humiliation, the grand gesture showing them what they'd lost, it all seemed hollow now. The truth was enough. The knowledge that Eleanor would go to bed every night knowing she'd traded a genuine man for a wealthy one, only to discover I'd been both all along. That was its own form of justice. But the story doesn't end there, because about a week later, something unexpected happened. Tyler came to me during dinner at my house. Our house, I'd started thinking of it. He set down his fork and looked at me with a serious expression that reminded me of my grandfather. "Dad," he said, "Mom told me about the money, about Grandpa's company." My heart sank. I'd wanted to tell them myself when the time was right. She shouldn't have. "I'm glad she did," Tyler interrupted, "because I need to ask you something. Why didn't you tell us before? Why did you let us think Richard was better because he was rich?" Hannah was watching me too, her eyes wide and uncertain. I took a breath. "Because I didn't want the money to change how you saw me. I wanted to prove that I was a good father, a real father, before you knew about any of this. I needed you to love me for me, not for what I could buy you." Tyler thought about this. Then he said something that broke my heart and healed it at the same time. "Dad, we never stopped loving you, even when things were bad, even when Mom said those things. You were always real to us." Hannah nodded emphatically. "You made us feel safe. Richard's nice and everything, but he's not you." I pulled them both into a hug and held on tight. That's all I ever wanted to hear. Over the next few months, life settled into a new normal. Better than normal, actually. I left my job at the construction firm and started my own company, Sullivan Development Group, named after my grandfather. We focus on affordable housing projects, something I was passionate about after years of seeing people struggle the way I had. I hired good people, paid them well, and built a business I was proud of, not because it made money, but because it helped people. I also established a scholarship fund in my grandfather's name at the University of Connecticut. Full rides for students from working-class families studying engineering or business. The first year, we awarded scholarships to 12 kids who reminded me of myself at that age, hungry, determined, convinced they had to work twice as hard to get half as far. I started dating again, too. Nothing serious at first, just reminding myself what it felt like to be wanted for who I was. There was a woman named Sarah, an architect I met through a housing project. She knew nothing about my money when we first started talking, just saw me as another developer trying to build something meaningful. When she eventually found out, she shrugged and said, "Okay, can you still make me laugh?" That's when I knew she was different. Tyler graduated high school that spring, top of his class, accepted to MIT with a full scholarship he'd earned on his own merit. At his graduation party, which I hosted at my house, with Eleanor and Richard graciously attending, he gave a speech that made everyone cry. He talked about resilience, about learning from his father that your worth isn't measured by your bank account, but by how you treat people when nobody's watching. He didn't mention the inheritance or the money. He just talked about the man he wanted to become, and it sounded a lot like the man I'd always tried to be. Eleanor pulled me aside that evening. We stood on my back deck, watching the kids play volleyball in the yard, and she said, "I made the biggest mistake of my life leaving you, didn't I?" I looked at her, really looked at her. She was still beautiful, still the woman I'd loved for 17 years. But she wasn't mine anymore, and I wasn't hers. We were different people now, shaped by choices we couldn't take back. "I don't think it was a mistake," I said finally. "I think it was necessary. You needed to chase what you thought would make you happy. And I needed to find out who I was without you. We both got where we needed to be. It just wasn't together." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Are you happy now, David?" I thought about my grandfather's letter, about becoming myself first before the money could define me, about Tyler's speech and Hannah's laughter, and the houses we were building for families like mine used to be, about Sarah, who loved me for my terrible jokes and the way I sang off-key in the car. "Yeah," I said, "I really am." Richard joined us a few minutes later. He'd had a few drinks and seemed more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. "Can I say something?" he asked. "Man to man?" I nodded. "I thought I was doing them a favor," he said quietly, "taking them in, giving them the life they deserved. But I've been married to Eleanor for a year now, and I'm starting to understand something. She doesn't love me the way she loved you. She loves what I can provide. And the kids, they're polite, they're respectful, but I'm not their father. I never will be. You are. And I think I was jealous of that before I even understood what it meant. It was the most honest thing Richard had ever said to me. I could have been cruel, could have thrown it in his face. Instead, I just put my hand on his shoulder and said, "Take care of them. That's all that matters." He nodded, relief flooding his face. "Thank you." As summer turned to fall, I found myself back in Litchfield County more often. I'd kept my grandfather's house, renovated it carefully, preserving everything that mattered while making it livable again. I'd go there on weekends sometimes, just to sit on the porch and think. Sarah came with me once, and we talked about the future, about building a life together slowly, carefully, without rushing into anything we weren't ready for. One evening, while Sarah was inside making dinner, I walked out to the field where my grandfather had taught me to work. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and orange, and I heard his voice in my head, as clear as if he were standing beside me. "Don't let it define you. You're so much more than money could ever make you." He'd been right. The inheritance hadn't saved me. It had just revealed what was already there, a man who'd been broken down and built himself back up, who'd lost everything and discovered he was enough all along. If you've made it this far, I want you to know something. This isn't just my story. It's a story about discovering that your worth isn't determined by what others think of you or what you have in your bank account. It's about resilience, about truth, about refusing to let life's cruelest moments define your ending. Eleanor traded love for luxury, and she'll live with that decision for the rest of her life. Richard got a beautiful wife and stepchildren who will never quite be his. And me, I got my life back. Not because of money, but because I finally understood that I'd been valuable all along. The inheritance was just confirmation of what my grandfather had always known. I was worthy of being chosen, worthy of being loved, worthy of having every opportunity in the world. Not because I'd earned it through suffering, but because I was his grandson, because I was me. 3 years have passed since I found that metal case in the attic. Tyler's at MIT now, studying computer science. Hannah's thriving in high school, talking about becoming an engineer like her great-grandfather. Eleanor and Richard are still married, though I hear through the kids that it's not always easy. They're in couples therapy, working through the complicated reality of a relationship built on the wrong foundation. As for me, I married Sarah last October in a small ceremony at my grandfather's house. 20 people, homemade cake, vows we wrote ourselves. It was perfect. We're expecting our first child in the spring, a boy. We're naming him Thomas. I think my grandfather would like that. The company is thriving. We built over 200 units of affordable housing across Connecticut and Massachusetts. The scholarship fund has expanded to 3 other universities. And I've even tracked down some of my grandfather's old patents that were sold off during the liquidation. Turns out a few of them are still generating royalties. I redirected that money into a foundation supporting small manufacturers and family-owned businesses, the kind of companies my grandfather believed in. But the most important thing I've learned, the thing I want to leave you with, is this: your value doesn't come from what's taken from you or what's given to you. It comes from who you choose to be in the moments when no one's watching, when you're at your lowest, when every voice around you says you're not enough. That's when you find out who you really are. I was always enough. I just had to discover it for myself. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own battles with feeling inadequate or undervalued, I hope you'll share it. Leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what this story made you think about. And please, check the description box for more stories like this one. Stories about people who refuse to let their circumstances define their worth. Because the truth is, we're all heirs to something greater than money. We're heirs to our own resilience, our own capacity for growth, our own ability to rebuild from nothing. And that's a fortune that can never be stolen, never hidden, never taken away. That case in the attic didn't save me. I saved myself. The money just made the second act a little easier to write. But I would have found my way back either way. Because that's what survivors do. That's what real fathers do. That's what people who refuse to give up do. We find our way home. We reclaim what's ours. And we build something new from the ashes of what we lost. My name is David Sullivan. I'm 45 years old. I'm a father, a husband, a businessman, and the grandson of a man who believed in me when nobody else did. And I'm here to tell you, whatever you've lost, whatever's been taken from you, whatever lies you've been told about your worth, none of it is the end of your story. It's just the beginning. Thank you for staying with me through this whole journey. It means more than you know. Check that description box. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the fortune you're looking for might be hidden in the last place you'd think to look. Sometimes it's in an attic. Sometimes it's in a memory. And sometimes it's been inside you all along, just waiting for you to be brave enough to claim it.